Hello, and welcome to No Boss, Bay Area worker-owned businesses in the pandemic and in the future. A panel discussion on democratic workplaces, how they navigated COVID-19, and what's next. I'm Hiya Swanhuyser, a student reporter with City College of San Francisco's journalism department. This panel discussion is part of the Democracy and the Informed Citizen Emerging Journalist Fellowship Initiative, a project of California Humanities. I'm a participating fellow. Let's begin by acknowledging that wherever we may be calling in from in the United States and elsewhere, we benefit by living and working on stolen Indigenous land. I'm personally on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula, and I intend to learn how to be a better guest. I invite speakers to acknowledge their own locations. Thanks go to the City College Journalism Department, to the independent nonprofit organization California Humanities, and to the fellowship's faculty advisor, Alex Mullaney, who also edits the Ingleside Light newspaper and works as part of the Independent Press Association's Save SF News project. Today, we're fortunate to have three panelists to discuss cooperative businesses and their responses to the pandemic and what's next. Adrionna Fike is one of 10 worker owners at Mandela Grocery Cooperative, West Oakland's 11-year-old worker-owned grocery store. She is a board member of the network of Bay Area worker cooperatives, also known as No Boss, which inspired the name of this panel. A grassroots organization of democratic workplaces dedicated to building workplace democracy in the San Francisco Bay Area. She's also an avid roller skater who values recreation equal to work. Cody Frost is one of Rainbow's marketing and creative strategists. He's been working at Rainbow Grocery Cooperative in San Francisco since 2007. Soon after the shelter-in-place order went into effect, Cody joined the COVID-19 response work group, a team dedicated to creating the infrastructure necessary to keep the workers and customers safe while still sustaining the business. He's been involved in most all aspects of the decision-making and public communication for Rainbow since that time. Nathan Schneider is an assistant professor of media studies at the University of Colorado Boulder, where he leads the Media Enterprise Design Lab. His most recent book is Everything for Everyone, the Radical Tradition that is Shaping the Next Economy. Thank you all so much for being here. For attendees, there will be a question and answer period at the end of our discussion. So please feel free to write your questions into the Q&A box somewhere down at the bottom of your screen. That's separate from the chat function. So be sure you get your questions into the Q&A. To situate us a little bit, as for myself, in 1995, I worked at a workers' collective, Uprisings Bakery in Berkeley, California. Before that, I had held restaurant jobs for several years. And what stays with me about Uprisings is the way I was welcomed into an environment of heightened care for one another. We bakers would stretch our hands and wrists before a shift, and I remember the drivers' long conversations about the conditions of van seats. Most of all, I remember a meeting at which we discussed the need for new and more rubber floor mats. At my other jobs, I had always wanted more rubber floor mats. Even as a very young person, I could feel the toll on my knees and back after working on concrete. I always wanted more mats. And here I was, choosing from a catalog full of them with my agreeing coworkers. It felt like the height of luxury and power. Last year, as the pandemic came on, that experience came back to me. With frontline workers' health and safety concerns up against a wall, I wondered if worker-owned businesses would buck the trend and continue the tradition of heightened care, one for another. Thanks to this fellowship, I've gotten the chance to safely spend time in cooperative spaces, and it's led me to want to know more and to hear from those on the front lines and maybe an academic or two. So a note before we get into questions, I use the terms co-op, democratic workplace and worker-owned business interchangeably. I recognize they have slightly different meanings, but for the purpose of this conversation, I hope they'll work together. If not, please discuss. So the first question is, what's most important about being a worker-owned business? Let's talk for the moment in pre-pandemic terms, and maybe Cody can start us off, but I'd like to hear from everyone on this. Cody, what's most important?
I'll have to apologize just in case you can hear somebody's come to fix our photocopier that's been broken and dismantled for a couple days. So hopefully that's not too distracting. What's important about a worker, like a cooperatively structured business? I think that it empowers the labor. It returns the ownership of labor back to those who are doing that labor. I think that for me, I had worked at, when I was living in Sacramento, I worked at Sacramento Natural Foods Co-op, which is a community co-op structured very differently. And when I moved to San Francisco, I was pretty soon able to get a job here, and it's radically different. I think it allows for a lot of skill sharing, a lot of self-development, communication. I think it's really important to have a diverse group of people be able to discuss how labor and responsibility impacts their lives, both here in the store as well as out in the real world. And I think that that sense of ownership and control over how work affects your life is really important. I think that unfortunately there are not as many opportunities for people to have that sense of control and engagement with the way that their labor and their livelihood affects their themselves. So I think those are all reasons why I find it important.
Great, thank you. Adrionna, what's important?
Same question. What's important? Culture is important. Culture is important, and that comes when people are able to and willing to and feel comfortable bringing their full selves to work. You know, people bringing themselves and where they come from, and all that they celebrate, and some baggage, and a lot of questions and vulnerability, of course, and just trying things. We have the ability to try new things, whether they're products or ideas, or people are throwing out a lot of ideas, so we're able to create things that we wouldn't have been able to create on our own, and create things that we wouldn't have perhaps been able to create in a different type of work setting. So I think that freedom, and like Cody said, the control, and autonomy to say, yes, this is ours, let's do this no matter what, because we're the boss, or there's no boss, so let's just go for it. I think that's been key to just our creative fire. And I say that as a member of a grocery store and as a member of No Boss. We see that with different cooperatives, and we see it within and among our cooperatives. So yeah, it's really cool. I would say autonomy, creativity, yeah, that blend, what comes of that autonomy and creativity, that culture, special.
Great, thank you. Nathan, do you want to weigh in on this one?
Sure. I'm the academic alluded to earlier, so not a worker owner of a worker co-op, but I do think it is worth pointing out the way in which the university itself comes out of some similar roots. It's not a cooperative structure, but it comes out of a guild tradition, which is another legacy of worker co-ownership, and it's been diluted in tremendous ways and it was never perfect to begin with by any means, but it does come with some features of self-governance and that kind of full self and autonomy that Adrionna mentioned. can be discovered in this legacy. And it's something that I'm very interested in as well, recognizing that the first university in Europe, the University of Bologna, was owned by its students, or governed by its students, I should say. The second, the University of Paris, was governed by its professors. I think we need to recognize the possibility of creating educational institutions that do all of that, that are really co-governed through this cooperative and guild tradition by the people who put energy into them, just as the worker co-ops we're talking about today are about. But another element I want to raise is a kind of macroeconomic story, which is the recognition that particularly since the 1970s in the United States, so this is a much older story. It goes back to the first slave ship, the first plantation, and colonization itself. But in the 70s, you see this very clear break where wages stopped increasing in comparison to purchasing power, and the returns to capital kept going up. And so we're living in a context where in more and more ways, the value that most people are creating in this economy is not going to those people who are doing the creating. It is going to a small class of capital holders, which at best includes something around half of the population, but the vast majority of that wealth goes to a very, very small percentage. And so we need to get much more serious about recognizing that wealth follows ownership in our society right now. And worker ownership is one strategy for capturing that value that we are creating as workers and ensuring that it creates wealth for those workers and is not extracted from them. So the urgency of this kind of model of worker ownership in a context where ownership is a part of the economy really matters. And finally, worker ownership has the capacity of transforming ownership from just a thing that we do in order to gain wealth and extract wealth to creating commons, where we are able to ask, is more wealth all we want, or do we want to create, as Adrionna said, fuller selves? Do we want to create spaces where we can put other kinds of objectives at the center of what we do?
Great. So democratic workplaces, to sort of come into the present time, democratic workplaces have made wildly different choices in responding to the pandemic. For example, the 25-year-old Arizmendi cooperatives here in the Bay Area are an association of various kinds of businesses, including construction and landscape. But among their well-known bakeries in San Francisco, one location never closed during the pandemic, while another bakery's worker owners voted to close with full pay for 2 months at the beginning of the stay-at-home order. And they both appear to be doing quite well now. So my question is, how have your cooperative business practices or cooperative traditions affected your responses to the pandemic? And Adrionna, I was particularly wondering if you would be able to address that in terms of what you see from a no boss perspective, regionally, I guess you would say.
Yeah, that's a challenge for me to answer, because working in the grocery space, we were so busy. You know what I mean? It's like we were in touch, no boss, we were in touch, but a lot of the co-ops, we were active. We were responding. I know Rainbow was, and I know that it was a coincidence. I don't know if it was just Godspeed or whatever, but 2 days before everything closed down, I went to Rainbow because we only had 6 hand baskets in our store. So I went to Rainbow and they had all these baskets that they were getting rid of because they didn't fit with other kind of baskets. So one of their workers called and said, we have all these baskets, can somebody pick them up? I went down there and picked them up, and 2 days later, everything was closed down and things got really busy and we had 30 hand baskets. It's like, we're still doing our connecting and things were just working out. There were a couple of co-ops. I know the Stud, Legendary, Gay Bar, they had to close their doors. There was a lot of, heart and concerned about that. But 2 weeks later, they were on Twitch, having performances online, so people were just being very agile. We still need to check in with folks and see how people are doing, but people were posting on the listserv, PP, all of the programs that were coming up. So the listserv was really active, but I know that the grocery stores were really busy, you know what I mean? And we saw a lot of folks from different co-ops shopping at our co-op. They were like, I'm not going to the other store. I'm going to shop at the co-op for various reasons, solidarity reasons, but also people feel safer. People were saying that we came here because we feel safer. We know that the store is going to be clean. We know you're going to have what we need because we know your vendors. So we didn't run out of toilet paper. Like, we had all the stuff because we were agile, and we did see a lot of the co-ops being agile. We got calls from Arizmendi in Emeryville and Arizmendi in Oakland on Lakeshore. People saying, what are you doing? Can we do some mutual aid activities together? We know we're closed, but, can you help us distribute pizzas in West Oakland? So it was a lot of, yes, regional, but also localized within the region, folks working together and trying to do mutual aid efforts to serve people in the community who had lost their jobs or people who were living, houseless. We never ran out of masks. So people were coming to us for masks because customers and people were just giving us masks. So we were sort of a hub. I'm speaking of Mandela. I'm curious to hear what Cody has to say. I know I tried to go to Rainbow a few times and the line was wrapped around the store twice. It was just, people came to the co-ops. They felt that security and that safety with us. So I'm curious as to what Cody has to say about that.
Yeah, it was, nobody's experienced anything like this ever. We actually, before I was on the work group, there was actually the board of directors had, as things started to happen, kind of unraveling early March, had actually actively suspended reusable containers, reusable bags before the city took action. We started making accommodations and started to say, okay, we need to start figuring out ways of strategizing how we're going to keep the store safe, our workers safe, our customers safe. So there were a lot of decisions that were made preemptively before anything that the city or the state was deciding on. And so we were kind of kind of leaning in before, into that curve. We're a big worker-owned co-op. We're now 230 people, I think. And so it's a big ship to steer. We're not as nimble as the Deep Co-op or Mandela, some of the smaller places. So it does take us a little bit more time, but I think that given our response, we've hired more people into the store. We needed more employees. We started finding people who were working in similar industries that needed help and needed assistance. So we actually increased our workforce by 15 to 20 people, I think, over the last year. We were able to really reflect on a lot of different things. We did look into, what it would take to, if we close the store, what would that mean? There's like all of those conversations were part of the dialogue that was happening amongst the membership. What are we going to do to keep our business safe and sustain ourselves? And, there was a lot of people who are very committed to being an essential worker, which was something that none of us had ever really reflected upon, but that we were committed. We're here for a reason. We're here, we're providing food, good food, clean food, service that people need. It should be us, we should be doing this. This is our business. This is our kind of what we're passionate about, a lot of us. And I think that the tradition of being a grocery store and worker owned, being able to make those decisions, feeling that sense of ownership, I think really empowered us to strategize ways that we could do the best we can with the resources available and also be present for our customers. And like Adrionna said, like we became a center for people. People were, this was a place where people came when they couldn't go anywhere else. They would come shop for groceries. This is necessity. And so, there's a lot of community in that too, being a place that people knew we would be proactive, we'd be safe, we'd be taken care of, and prioritizing our workers and our customers. Yeah, I mean, I remember hearing about the stud. That was a bummer. It was really sad. Some of our ex-work coworkers were members of that co-op. And it was exciting to see everybody kind of find alternative means of creating support systems for themselves, which is great. So I think that's it. A lot of it was just kind of really reflecting on what it meant for us to be a worker-owned co-op and also be a grocery store for the public. I think those are really important things.
Thank you both. Nathan, I was actually planning to read a passage from your book next, so it'll be as if you're speaking. I'm going to read a passage from Everything for Everyone, which kind of explains in like lyrical, philosophical terms what a co-op is. But in your responses, if you could be very blunt and descriptive about how a business makes decisions without a boss, how do you operate day to day without managers? So here is this passage. Perhaps the real visionaries of the future of work are not the app makers, but those organizing co-ops in the fast-growing care sectors, ensuring that the most difficult work remains accountable to flesh and blood and heart. If the cooperative legacy did not exist, their task might seem insurmountable, but it's really no worse than hard. As the stories I've told in this book declare, cooperation is no drop-in solution for everything. It's a process that happens a million ways at once, a diversified democracy. The troubles are as endemic as the promise. It starts with the capacities we already have, recombined to solve common problems. The Commonwealth doesn't defer its business until after the world passes through some revolutionary event. It doesn't wait for things to get worse so they can get better. It doesn't appear from nowhere and disrupt everything. Instead, it grows through what Grace Lee Boggs called critical connections, bridging generations, forging bonds too strong for profiteers to break. It requires people who know their own strengths. I was going to ask Adrionna if you wanted to begin again, just to sort of explain what kind of businesses are served by No Boss or make up No Boss.
Sure. I don't even know if I know them all, but I know that we have 42 member organizations in No Boss, and we represent almost 100, democratic workplaces, worker cooperatives and cooperative nonprofits in the Bay Area, from a diverse range of sectors. We have obviously food co-ops, grocery stores, bakeries. We have a real estate cooperative. There are some design cooperatives. There are, I wish I had the full list, but we have some entertainments and media cooperatives. There's an architecture cooperative in there. We have construction cooperatives, as you mentioned. Help me out, Cody. I wish I had the list in front of me.
There's a lot of different things. I know that in the past, when I was previously when I was on public relations, we did a big push during National Co-op Month, which was in October.
Yeah.
And we used a bunch of No Boss resources. And there's things as like house cleaners.
Yeah.
There's tech support, people who do computer work and things like that. There's printers. There's a number of like print shops.
Print shops.
Some of them are screen printers. Some of them are just like digital printers and offset printing. So it's amazing because a lot of people, I think, assume that a co-op most commonly is a grocery store or food co-ops or even housing co-ops. That's another one. But when really just explain to people that the structure of a co-op is really just how you make decisions and who has the ownership of and responsibility of the business. That it can literally be anything, any type of business, any type of organization. It makes people a little confused at first, but then they go, oh really? Anything? And you're like, yeah, it's up to you, whatever you want it to be. You know?
Right. And sort of the new wave of No Boss, it's like our new or refreshed grassroots approaches is reaching out to people and letting them know that, it's like, I know some folks, my barber, I take him information about co-ops and he's like, yeah, I need some more barbers, but nobody's hanging around and I can't get any reliable people. And I gave him Collective Courage. I gave him a book and I said, check this out. Like, this can be a co-op. We talk about, he asked me how Mandela is all the time. Let's talk about this barbershop, you know what I mean? Beauty salons, barbershop, nail shop, like you said, any type of business. And you want reliable people who care, people you can depend on. Let's have the co-op conversation. So that's a lot of what No Boss is doing these days. We're getting more into sort of public education. We're moving into the, library spaces and working with some schools. We started that in 2019. So after this, pandemic has evolved in a different way and we're able to interact in person, we want to do more of that. Letting people know that this can be what you're doing. This can be, based around your skill set and your desires and your passion. So.
Amazing. The barbershop is such a cool idea.
Kind of obvious. It's like, oh yeah.
I tried to convert mine too.
Nathan, I wonder if you can give us like a cut and dried academic description for people who aren't familiar with the concept, maybe. How do these businesses work with No Boss?
Well, I mean, again, as that passage suggested, there is so much variety, and it's just important to honor that. But I think of a cooperative just as a business that's owned and governed by its participants. And worker cooperatives are one part of that tradition. They're a really important part of that tradition. It's really the area of growth and imagination right now in this country where a lot of the energy is going and a lot of the creativity is happening. But we also have consumer-owned cooperatives, which we've mentioned a little bit, where it's the shoppers or whoever is buying stuff that owns it. There are cooperatives owned by businesses that we often don't see, but that enable small businesses all around the country to survive against big box stores and that sort of thing. So it's a varied and diverse and interesting sector. And how co-ops choose to govern really depends on their context, right? So a very small co-op, like y'all mentioned tech co-ops earlier. There's a small tech co-op in my town, a few blocks away. They're able to make decisions really collectively because it's relatively small. And then there are larger ones like a little down the road here is a solar panel installer co-op that has grown to a few hundred workers, and they had to evolve a more complex governance structure. They have a really wonderful chart actually that helps you identify based on what kind of decision you need made, who you have to go to, what level of the membership you have to take it to. And so, some co-ops end up looking a lot like fairly conventional businesses, and sometimes that can be disappointing to those of us who are interested in a world in which there is no hierarchy at all. But it still matters that ultimately even that CEO is accountable back down to the lowest worker owner. That's very different from that CEO lying awake at night having to make decisions for outside investors who only care about their money. So regardless of the type, the form that cooperative governance takes day to day in one business to another, the goal is that ultimately the accountability for those big hard decisions, like what do you do when you run into a problem like a pandemic, that those decisions are made with the with those core participants at heart. And in this case, the workers, who are so often the ones first to be thrown under the bus when a crisis hits in other kinds of businesses.
Great. I wonder if you could talk about how resilient are your workplaces. I've heard people say, oh, well, that can't last. And, I'm always happy to explain that there are cooperatives like the Cheese Board that's, I think, 50 plus years old in the Bay Area. And of course, there are many, many others throughout the country and the world that are quite old. I don't know that much about Mondragon, but we can talk about that. And I've also heard people ask, are co-ops ready to sort of do their part in the recovery? And Adrionna, it made me think of something I heard you say during the G show on Liberated Lens. You used the term regenerative to describe co-ops. Would you say they're regenerating?
I'd say so. I think that stems from what you mentioned earlier, or someone mentioned about care, use the word care. And I think that's at the heart of regeneration, because when you care about, let's start with personally, when you care about yourself, when you're tired, you rest. Like when you really care, you know what I mean? Like the thing they say on the airplanes, before you can assist somebody else, make sure your airflow is taken care of. So we understand that, our bottom line is concern for community, but that means that's a self-reflective stance as well. You know what I mean? So as workers, we regenerate by taking care of ourselves so that we are renewed and refreshed and we eat well. So when we get here, we can be, upright and ready to take on anything that comes our way, that resilience, that bounce back. So I think to me, that's where that comes from. Centered around care for our business, care for every single piece of inventory in the store, care for all the leaves on the kale, making sure, the bottoms of the cilantro is cut precisely so that everything has what it needs to just be upright and, sustain and withstand, anything that comes our way. And I think that's emblematic of all the co-ops that I've ever interacted with. You can see it when you walk in on the workers' faces a lot of the time. You can see the way they organize the products. You can see it a lot of the time on their website, what it looks like. You can just see a level of care in the word choice that they use, how they represent themselves, how they talk about the cooperative and how they interact with coworkers. There's a loveliness to it that is, it's seemingly authentic, and that's why we last and withstand, because we're making decisions for the best, for our best interests and for the best interests of our wider community simultaneously. And it's not about the money exclusively. So when you, we are working. Well, how do we talk about cooperatives? The money is not working us; we're working the money. There's a way that we talk about it. It's like, yeah, we're not being used by the money; we're using the money for our benefit. So that's where I think that resilience stems from. It's that deep care.
Yeah, and I'll speak to that too. That there are reasons why we've all kind of been drawn into these places, and they can be pretty wide. I mean, I work with quite a few different perspectives, different passions, different interests, different focuses, even within the store. I think that helps bring a strong, healthy kind of ecosystem to the business itself, of having everybody kind of really work together and strategize the best possible options. What are the outcomes that were going to make us survive and be resilient? I think that, being a grocery store, I think being here is kind of an institution for our community, the customers that come here, the people looking for the fresh produce and the access to our bulk section and stuff. I think that's really important. I think that's kind of helps reinvigorate and kind of make people feel definitely a sense of groundedness and kind of sense of normalcy, is that they can go to their co-op that's been agile and is able to kind of weather this. I think that long term, I think we are going to, as like everybody's business kind of stabilizes, because being a brick and mortar, even a grocery store during this pandemic has been a challenge, especially with customer capacities being cut pretty heavily by the state and the city. You see a lot of restaurants and retail establishments folding because they can't operate, under that kind of restriction. And I think that part of the thing that we will most likely be looking forward to is how to help support the rest of the community and other things. How do we do more engagements with sponsorships of events and local organizations as they're kind of rebuilding and restructuring? How are we going to be participating with our donations program to kind of reestablishing those relationships? I think that's going to be a big part of what's going to help, what Rainbow is going to be able to help. But I think other cooperatives, I think that awareness of that struggle and the support systems like No Boss there to kind of help everybody elevate and find resources and share resources, information. I think that's a huge part of the huge part of the draw for me is like, I know that I'm not in it just for myself. I know that this isn't just here. I know that there's a lot of other people, even if we're working in different industries, that are all trying to survive and support themselves and their communities, whatever they're doing. So that's a great bonding, and it's a great strength that we can find, that camaraderie. And I think that hugely impacts and ripples out from each co-op's base. That ripples out, and people get a sense of that. It's important.
Can I add to that that last thought? No Boss is currently restructuring the whole organization. So because we know that with our membership and the richness of our membership in the Bay Area, our capacity is great. Like, we have so much skills, talent, and knowledge. One co-op that I didn't mention earlier was the Sustainable Economies Law Center. And we're actually working with them right now with the plan for them to be our fiscal sponsor. No Boss is not a nonprofit right now. We're just kind of affiliated, unincorporated affiliate organization. So we are moving toward perhaps nonprofit status, but the membership, we haven't agreed on that. We haven't had a membership meeting since the end of 2019. So right now we're restructuring so that the Sustainable Economies Law Center can work as our fiscal sponsor, so that we can raise funds, so that we can do more for the membership, because we have, the riches of the Bay Area at our fingertips. That is more now than, I don't want to say ever, but now more than in a very long time, embracing the worker cooperatives again and getting our reach and our ability to really serve people and be transformative in our community. So we're really excited about, reflecting in this moment of the pandemic, being like, yeah, we have such a great capacity to do so much because of the richness of the 42, dues paying members in our organization, and also the 90 plus, organizations that we're serving, and those that are coming up and asking questions. So we're just increasing our capacity to do more with funding and fundraising, which is cool.
Great. Nathan, I don't know if you can speak to sort of what you're seeing on a national level, or from your point of view, are co-ops resiliating?
I can't speak to what's on the ground now, because we just don't know on the big picture story right now, where there's research happening right now, but we don't know the answers yet. I can speak historically a bit. Historically, cooperatives have demonstrated their capacity to be more resilient, especially in downturns and major crises, than other kinds of businesses, because they, as you've heard, they focus on what matters in a way that, is just good for long-term health. The other piece of it, though, that I think is really important to consider is the role of policy in these kinds of moments. Crises reveal how deeply unable capitalism is to deal with human crises. And so it's been in crises where often, co-ops have struggled, but have also really been able to shine. And I'm really hopeful that we keep those narratives alive in us. I mean, the most important moment for creating co-op policy in US history was the Great Depression, which hurt a lot of cooperatives, but it also compelled, because there were powerful movements supporting cooperatives, including the labor movement, the agricultural movement, others, they converged on this model, and we got the rural electric cooperatives essentially solving the rural electrification crisis of that period. We got the core financial infrastructure for credit unions that spread across the country. We got the tools for agricultural cooperatives. Those were incredibly powerful mechanisms, but they were also very limited. Worker cooperatives, despite a lot of innovation happening around the country in local communities, including, for instance, the Bay Area, in Colorado, where I live, we have a state level process around employee ownership. But we really don't have the policy that worker co-ops need. When a group of workers wants to buy out their owner, they don't have ready access to financing to become a worker cooperative at this point. Even after legislation was passed in 2018 to help the SBA, the Small Business Administration, do that, the federal government still hasn't implemented it. So we have to recognize that cooperatives are deeply disadvantaged in the way our economy is designed for employee owners, and B, that there are like commonsensical ways that we've done before in other sectors, like rural electrification, where we can create financial infrastructure to make it so that worker owners are on a same or better footing than investor owners. And so we need to set our goals high, and be honest about the fact that currently worker co-ops are a very small percentage of the economy, and that can and should change. We need to create policy agendas and demands, especially in crisis moments like this, when we are talking about once in a generation infrastructure plans, when we're talking about major outlays around care and how care is organized, how care work will be organized. This is the time to ensure that groups of people looking to form cooperatives have the same or better access to capital and support that wealthy investor owners do right now, and recognize that that is not currently the case by any means.
Read the book, everybody. My next question is, what have been the major challenges that co-ops have faced in the pandemic? And maybe they're not different significantly. And maybe you could say, maybe Cody and Adrionna, maybe you could say how your workplaces met those challenges or made decisions together to address those challenges of the pandemic.
I can start off. So yeah, it was very challenging. We had to. Our building is quite large, actually, here, Rainbow, but we don't have a ton of like common space areas or shared space areas. We have a few small rooms that we do, are smaller everyday kind of decision making. We're a democratically elected, non-hierarchically structured organization, so we don't have management at any tier. We have committees. And with social distancing and masking and everything like that, that became obviously very strained process. One of the things that we did was we actually invested in some technology that allowed us to do and started integrating more directly into our decision-making processes, things like this. where people could remote in either from a computer here in the office area or from home, mobile devices, things like that. And it took us a little while. There was probably a 3-month or 4-month period where no department meetings were happening. Obviously, our board of directors and our steering committees, they were meeting, but they had to really strategize how they were doing that. And even our first membership meeting post the beginning of pandemic was this awkward Frankenstein of half, remoting in and half people in the store, everybody spread out and trying to have a coherent conversation. We've gotten better. We've all adjusted and acclimated, and we're now having more regular meetings and making decisions again. But that lack of immediate proximity really affected us in a way that I think we were unaware, we were unprepared for. Just not being able to be really present with each other and have those open dialogues about what we were, especially in a kind of a critical moment where we're having to make really important big decisions and discussions about our business and how we're going to be proactive in different ways. It was challenging, but we figured it out.
For us, thinking about what Cody just said and reflecting on the beauty of small, I mean, we definitely, I think, have an advantage and had an advantage of being a small business. There are 12 of us, 10 owners, one assistant, and one candidate who's on the path of ownership. And we were able to make decisions really swiftly, like really quickly. It's like, okay, such and such is not here. Get him on the phone. Let's talk about this. We decided in one meeting that we were going to change our store hours. So we were open from 7 to 8. We cut our hours, and now we're open from 9 to 6. Every Monday morning, we have a meeting at 7 a.m. So yeah, we weren't able to meet together in one room, but everybody, okay, help James download Zoom, help her get on this, so people are just having to adapt to the technology really quickly, which was cool because we had people who could explain it really clearly. So we just 7 to 9 a.m. Everybody was like, okay, I'm at home. We're meeting. It actually felt like it became a little more relaxed and people participated a little bit more because they didn't, we weren't all sitting there looking at each other in the eye. I know that sounds kind of weird, but there are some people who are shyer who started participating more because they were on Zoom or they were on the phone, you know what I mean? And they were weighing in on really big decisions, So that was really cool to see some people step up in different ways and see their personality shine, differently over the phone in a general meeting, making these grand decisions. There's kind of a bar and restaurant across the street from the co-op, 7th West, and a couple of their workers shop in here. And one person was like, I lost my job, and we were able to offer them a job. And people were like, okay, let's do it. You know what I mean? We need some extra help. We have this huge orders coming in because, more people are shopping here. People are coming to the co-op. So we were just able to adapt really quickly to everything because there's only 10 of us and a lot of us we're all on the same page pretty much about most things. But I would say the biggest challenge were the supply chain issues. Because our distributors were running out of things and we had to find alternatives, and luckily we did have several sources for particular products and items, so we just had to be working the phones and working people, and calling and say, I know we need this exception, we have a relationship, what we're about, we're a co-op, we're in this so-called food desert, we need to make it happen, you know what I mean? And we were able to leverage our place and our commitment to all people. People were really responding quite well to that. So I would say the biggest challenge was just working all of our sources and tapping into, all of our resources to make sure we had the things that our workers needed. Not our workers, but our store needed and our community needed. So, yeah. And I think we came out of that with with more resources. So now we have a lot more options. We can get better pricing on things. We have more options. And at times we did need to call Rainbow and ask where they get such and such. And we did need to call other avenues and ask them where they get, these gloves, because this company went up $1 per box on gloves. So we had to do a lot of, searching around within the cooperative community to get the things we needed at the prices we needed them.
So there's that inter-resiliency.
I just want to say that, yeah, we've actually, just to kind of echo, the participation, we've seen a huge increase because now we have access to this technology. We had a membership meeting, which is store-wide meeting, at the for May Day. Oh, no, I'm sorry, not May Day, the month before, March, Cesar Chavez Day. And normally when we have it, it's either early in the morning on a day off or late at night sometimes, and we only get probably about 40% participation, people having to come. Maybe people aren't willing to cross the Bay Bridge to come on their day off or something. But the last membership meeting we had almost 120 people participating, which is astounding because it's really more of that direct engagement and involvement in the decision-making process. More people feel heard, more people are able to participate and make decisions. And I think that ultimately comes out with better results. So there's been some weird pluses coming out of a lot of these different kind of everybody's scurrying and being resourceful. There's been some positives.
Huh. Okay, well, we are almost at the end of the hour. I want to remind attendees that if they have questions, to drop them in the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. And then I wanted to get sort of a quick, maybe like a short answer, or it could even be a yes or no question. Did your workplaces, or in the case of Nathan, did the workplaces you're in touch with, were they supported by local governments? Was it enough? Did it work? So, like I said, short answer.
For us, with the work group that I was on, that was kind of dealing with all the COVID responses, getting all the updates from the city and everything. One of my coworkers, Gordon, was kind of the liaison between us and the city, the officials, and they seemed very responsive. They understand the struggles that our businesses in general were going through, and they were trying to best communicate as things were changing, things were happening, the potential conversations that were happening behind closed doors of like what may be coming up, and other processes. So, I mean, I know that they were very much critical in the early phasing of reintroducing our bulk goods departments, our bulk departments, and how we would be able to safely do that, which months ago we had kind of like a half open bulk area where people could buy those products in quantity. They couldn't reuse their containers, but they could still get access to it. Then, we went to purple tier, that got shut down, then it kind of reopened. So they've been very, I think in our experience, they've been very responsive and attentive and very much eager to help us kind of weather this storm. So I hope that's been the experience that everybody's had.
I can't say that the city of Oakland. I don't even feel the presence of the city of Oakland during this time. But I can say our local city council member for our district, Carol Fife, who is our new city council person, is a community activist, like real, like, and really down with, making sure Black people have what they need. And so She is a part of an organization affiliated with an organization called Community Ready Corps, or CRC. And they do pretty amazing work, but they have been raising funds for a while, and they have been able to offer the community gift cards. So it seemed like every other week during the pandemic, they would be calling us and asking us to issue 100 or 50 gift cards for $50. So it'd be a 5,000. That'd be one of our full sales days, and one phone call from CRC asking us to generate gift cards to hand out, so they could hand out to people in the community. So they would be, we would have houseless people, we would have very low income folks saying, this is my first time shopping here. I've always wanted to shop here. I'm so glad that I can come. I have EBT. I could also use that and get the half price discount. I'm so glad, they call us, a CRC coming, will they be here this week? So I would say in that way, we have, our city council person has our back in that way, where they know that they are contributing to not only the residents of the community, but to Mandela Grocery Cooperative. So that's been really powerful, and it's been great, financially for us, and great to meet, new customers in this way. And now people, when they don't have the gift card, they come in, they say, okay, I know y'all have this good, this here. So it's been really great. That's been really great for us. And we hope, through this, and with this restructuring of No Boss, and also focusing more on policy, we have a couple of new board members from the SELC who focus on policy issues that will be, begin to put more, care and pressure on the city of Oakland to follow through with some of the, things that they said they would in 2016-17 around, following through on city ordinance to get some priorities for worker cooperative advancement.
Great. Well, you basically all kind of answered my last question already, which was to talk about the future of democratically run businesses. So I'm going to take the last few minutes that we have and go to a question from Elizabeth Lopez, which is a question for Nathan. And the question is, how would you go about convincing a profitable corporation to become a co-op? What would the benefit be to the owners?
Yeah, it's a good question. And there is the answer of the present, and there's the answer that should be the answer, right, in the future. And in the present, it is, okay, maybe maybe your business is of a profile where it actually could make sense in the current moment to convert to a co-op. Increasingly, business owners are exploring this option, and it's exciting when they do. And some of the businesses that the Bay Area worker co-ops didn't start that way, but converted. Currently, though, in the U.S., the much more accessible way for businesses with large capital flows to convert is into a structure called an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan, which is kind of an employee-owned retirement plan. And this is because policy was created to enable it, and appropriate tax structures were put in place so that workers actually can borrow money to become an ESOP much more easily and at larger scale. The future answer is it really should be an option available to any business owner looking to sell, or workers who want their business owner to sell. There have been proposals, for instance, from Bernie Sanders for a right of first refusal, where workers would have the right to be consulted about a potential sale of their business. We're starting to see examples like the Main Street Phoenix project, which is an attempt to create a private equity fund that is owned by the workers. Oberon Cooperative in Baltimore is another example of this. And so we need to have the infrastructure so that we can make those conversions more easily. But if you do know of any business owners that are interested in the conversation, organizations like Project Equity in the Bay Area, one example of an organization that is very, very interested in facilitating these conversions. And so I encourage you to explore that possibility in the context of the realities that we now live in.
Thank you all so much. That's the hour. And it's really amazing to me to sort of have heard how many ways the interconnectedness of co-ops helps that resiliency, that strength, and that movement toward the future. So thank you all so much for bringing all your knowledge and expertise and your heart.
Thank you.
Thank you for
bringing
having
us
us
together.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
What's your book called again, Nathan?
Everything for Everyone.
That's right. Okay.